Welcome to our session on collective memory. In 1950, there was a family in Söke cultivating cotton. They are from Istanbul and they are well off. At the head of the business, there is this lady from Istanbul, well educated. She was keeping a diary of the whole process, and in her diaries she said the water they were using for the cultivation came from a water source. She wanted to see the source. The villagers took her to a mountain and a spring there. The source there, but they were cleaning the cistern. They had buckets and brushes, and they were cleaning around the cistern. And two big snakes were then taken from the cistern. And they gave the two large snakes, to one of the guys outside, and they keep the snakes in a big basin of water, and then after cleaning is done in this holy spring, then they turn on the taps again and they release the snakes back into the water. And this lady asked them, "Why did you release the snakes back in the water? What do they do in the water that we drink?" "Well, these snakes keep this water for us. They eat the beetles, bugs, insects, whatever that would otherwise render the water polluted. So that's why they have to be kept in the water."
Böceği temizlerler. Anılardan
So our memories are like those snakes. Our memories keep our minds and hearts clean. They make sure that we survive. So that's why in this session we're going to talk about collective memory. Memories keep us sane. They also create a weakness. Yes, we would be more susceptible to blows and suffering. But even human conscience only exists thanks to memories. Time has this kind of strength. Remembering sometimes makes us sad, but also makes sure that we have a strong tie between, who we are today and who we were yesterday, and it keeps us conscious and keeps our conscience and our minds clean and clear, I think. The very first panelist is Boris Belenkin from the International Memorial Society. This was established in 1989 in Tbilisi during protesting police raids, which ended in deaths. And now they have a legal entity, and they are aiming to gather evidence for terror in the hands of state and disclosing some of the crimes committed by the hand of the state. And they have a library in Moscow where they bring this evidence together. They have established a museum. They have books on memory, and they publish lists of those who were executed. And despite all pressure, Boris Belenkin continues to work in former Soviet Union countries, fighting for the rights of refugees, and attracts attention to human rights violations in difficult geographies. Now I will start with him, therefore. I will ask him my first question. Boris Belenkin. In order to put a stop to state terror, you have had, many activities. So my question to you is, what is the importance of understanding the past? Why don't we leave the past alone, but we actually probe into it and learn more about it? Well, I would like to go back to what you have said in the very beginning regarding memorial. Memorial was established in the end of 1980s. And the Soviet public back then was really interested in history. And around that time, there was a group of people who came together, and they were very keen on bringing things to light, particularly regarding the past history of the Soviet Union. They were interested in the history of the Soviet Union, what happened in the Soviet Union, and also they were interested in bringing to light what happened during the times of oppression. And let me also try to remind you this. Maybe you might have forgotten. In the Soviet Union, the history of the 20th century was told completely erroneously. There was a wrong telling of the 20th century. Everything was either suppressed or completely prohibited. To talk about the true history of the 20th century was banned. The prehistorica policy that was installed by Gorbachev, some of the censorship was removed and some incidents were finally revealed, which found interest in the public opinion. The highly circulating literature magazines, periodicals, they had millions of subscribers, by the way, back then. They had 10 millions of subscribers, and there was a lot of interest, and these magazines, these periodicals were publishing the newly revealed true information. But then that interest was lost. So memorial works with historical memory, collective memory. But as I said, there was a lot of interest, which then was lost. First, we thought this was due to economic hardship, because due to some reforms, people lost their jobs in the beginning of 1990s. People lost their jobs, they did not have any money, so the Soviet Union had collapsed, and there were the independent Commonwealth countries. But we were wrong to assume that this was due to economic hardship. The reason was more tragic. those few years during Gorbachev, there was no censorship. There was a keen interest by the public opinion in true information. But then we saw that this did not leave any trace or an impact on social consciousness. It did not leave any impact on collective memory, on history. How about today? In the Russian Federation, the issues related with historical memory are now finally interesting again, because nobody talked about the history before, nobody talked about what happened in the past before. It's like everything is starting from scratch. I think the biggest problem regarding historical or collective memory is that it's not easy to fill in the gaps where there are gaps. And there are many actors trying to fill in those gaps. The state, on the one hand, tries to fill in the gaps in the collective memory. The society, on the other hand, might have a total different perspective, a different outlook. And there is a polarized society in the Russian Federation as well, and this has an impact on collective memory. I don't want to take much of your time here, but the main problem is, of course, when people try to understand the events of the past, they try to understand who was right, who was wrong. That's basically how we look at, what happened in the past. We try to imagine what's happened in the past, and we want to understand who is right and who is wrong. So, on the one hand, people see the state as the culprit, and on the other hand, sometimes the state could be the hero saving the people from the hands of fascism, because the state also helps to overcome and overthrow fascism. So on the one hand, the state is the hero, and on the other hand, it's the culprit and the perpetrator of many tragic events. So people are trying to understand that paradox as well and fill in the gaps. But the collective memory is shaped by the hands of the state, and the state therefore manipulates the memory in order to serve its own interests. Then the past is portrayed in a light which is favorable to the state, and a rosy picture is painted. So the message usually is, things were really difficult, but we were really heroic, good people, and we were able to overcome all difficulties, all hardships. On the other hand, of course, there are intellectuals, human rights activists in our countries. They want to raise awareness. They want to raise awareness in the public about what has really happened. They want the public to be more sensitive, more active. They want to mobilize people around truth, and around the good. Thus, in Russia right now, there is true polarization. There is a certain part of the society, a smaller circle, a smaller part of the society that can hear about the truth, that is willing to hear about the truth and live accordingly, whereas the bigger part of the society does not even care, they do not want to hear the truth, and this is the polarization that we have to live with and work with in Russia. Thank you. Thank you. Some years back in Germany, in a concentration camp, I was visiting this concentration camp by invitation from the other of my colleagues. The concentration camp had been turned into a museum, and at the entrance there was a big monumental grave. People left small pebbles there to show that they remembered. So such gatherings also are like those pebbles, helps us remember, helps us show that we care. So we are actually trying very hard to not to forget. Let me give you another metaphor here. In 1984, in Diyarbakır, in the Diyarbakır prison, people went on hunger strikes. On the 40th day of that strike, we had to hospitalize Ercan Kesal, and there were others as well, of course. Orhan's mother tried to clean the wounds on her son's body and in his mouth by using a small wad of cotton. And the nurse there said, "Don't worry, don't do it like this. You hurt him more." Because the wound, actually, when you try to clean it with a wad of cotton, you actually refresh the wound. That's what they told. He told the mother. I'm a doctor by profession. Sometimes, as I read and write about these matters, I always ask myself, I'm trying to do good, but am I really actually poking a wound here? Am I really causing more hurt than comfort? I was looking for a relief from my problem, says the poet, but my wound, the problem itself was actually the relief. So that's maybe one perspective by which we can look at things. We have İkbal Eren here representing the Saturday mothers. Every Saturday, these mothers go and sit with a wad of cotton, if you will. Then they ask they have been asking for an explanation for the disappearance of their sons, husbands, for 700 weeks. The movement started in 1995. Hasan Ocak was expected to return, but he did not return for 55 days, and it was then found out that his body, carrying evidence of torture, had been left in a forest in Istanbul and buried in a cemetery later for the homeless. Then 30 people with relatives who had also lost their loved ones in custody gathered to draw public attention in the Galatasaray Square, and they sat there for half an hour every day silently, and they continued to sit there, and the movement expanded. In 1999, the gatherings had to stop due to heavy state oppression, and after a brief hiatus of 10 years, in 2009, the gatherings were resumed, and the mothers continue their silent struggle. They ask for the remains of their relatives, but they want also the state to be held accountable and brought to justice for the disappearances. So, the wound. You're scratching the wound. Now, in my book, I wrote about this. Also on TV, I talked about this once. Ibrahim Arslan. They find his remains, right? He finds, after 18 years, the remains of his son in a deep well. The remains, the bones had burn scars. This guy was telling about this on TV. And you know what? He was bursting into tears of happiness. I did not understand first. He was happy. He was happy that he finally found the remains of his son. After 18 years of not having any news from him. And I thought to myself, this is all we can do? So, in 1995, Iqbal, you started going and sitting as Saturday mothers and to raise awareness about people who have disappeared with no explanation. In 1999, you had to stop these gatherings due to heavy police attacks and state oppression. You started in 2009 again. You resumed your meetings. You are sitting for your brother Hrant Dink Award. You go there every week, every single Saturday. It must be one of the most difficult things that you do in your life. Why do you insist on doing this?
Öncelikle hep beyaz güvercinleriyle hatırladığım hafızama kazınmış.
Well, there's something that I will never forget. The scene that I will never forget. You are all friends to Hrant Dink, the man in the scene. So I would like to first of all welcome you all and greet you all. Now, we've been sitting for 702 weeks, for 23 years. 2 weeks of which had to be set somewhere else. We insist, yes, to sit there. Why? As Ercan also explained a little bit in his introduction, we are spouses, we are wives who lost their husbands, we are siblings who lost their brothers, we are mothers who lost their sons, or right now we are grandsons, grandchildren who lost their grandparents. If we had not sat there for 702 weeks, these kids would have just assumed their grandparents non-existent, gone, because that's what the state did. The state arrested them, detained them, and they lost them. Then they just pretended that they never existed. That the grandchildren actually sit there signifies that these people did actually exist. They were not non-existent. if we had not sat there every Saturday, we would never have found remains. We would never have been happy at finding any remains at all. If we had remained silent, just like the state had asked us to do, the grandchildren of today would not have known anything about their grandparents, because those grandparents in the state's books never existed. So, the fresher we keep our memory, the stronger we will be at the foundation. In the tradition of states, there is the tendency to cover up certain truths. The state policy is built on making people forget. Because if you forget, you accept. And if you forget about your past in time, then your future is built on lies, and you form a sick society. However, if you were to refresh memories, if you keep the past alive, if you, instead of forgetting, confront the past and the truths, then you can release yourself of your traumas, and you could have a society with healthy individuals. That is the reason why we sit. In order, just so that we do not forget our loved ones, and that people do not forget those people. We share the truth with the public. We ask for the bones, the remains of the people that we have lost. We want those responsible to be held accountable. We want those accountable to be brought to justice. We ask for this every Saturday, every week. Why? Because we do not have graves. Me, my mother Hanife, is there, and hundreds of mothers. They do not even have a grave where they could put flowers and remember their loved ones, their sons. That's why, since we do not have a graveyard, a grave to visit, a tomb to go to place our wreaths and flowers, we go visit the Galatasaray Square in Taksim, and we put our flowers there. Well, I will do a second tour, but I will ask you this question, because it's a pressing question. I can't really stop myself. Now, this your gatherings now are banned at the 700th week. So how will you continue to do them? What are you going to do? Well, the Saturday Mothers campaign protest is the longest protest, second longest protest in the world. Plaza de Mayo Mothers protest is the longest, and this is the second longest event. We're not willing to stop just because somebody wants us to. We have not been delivered any results, but now we're being told to disperse. Whatever the conditions are, whatever they are doing, we will never give up on looking for our relatives, asking for their remains, and asking for those responsible to be brought to justice. So it doesn't really matter what the new conditions might be. In the 701st and 702nd weeks, we have shared our press releases under really difficult conditions, But we will continue to do it because the state, the government needs to face with this, needs to confront this, and they need to answer us. The president of today has actually talked to us and has legitimized the Saturday mothers once upon a time in the past, you know, in his previous office. So we will continue to sit, we will continue to get together, and we will not give up, doesn't matter what, doesn't matter what.
Efendim sizlere Albie Sachs'tan söz edeceğim çok kısa.
Now I'm going to talk to you about Albie Sachs. But before that I would like to say a few words about Hrant Dink, who is the cause for this gathering, who actually brought us all together here, who is the reason why we're here. Perseverance, insistence. I think Albie Sachs is also a representative of perseverance and resistance, by the way. Anyways, now, I wrote about the death of Hrant Dink, and I called that Monday the Red Monday. When everybody actually knew what was going to happen, but nobody did anything to stop it, like the Red Monday of Marquez. Santiago Nazar, after being stabbed, he's one of the heroes of the Bloody Monday, the Red Monday. He staggers home, he can't find the door. He's walking with difficulty, and his aunt sees him, and the aunt does not like the way he looks and asks, Santiago, what's wrong with you? And he says, they killed me. This is the part which has never failed to move me. It really moves me. He doesn't say, I am dead. He says, they have killed me, and he's still trying to find the way home. And I followed on from that episode in the book, and I said, if Hrant had not died, if he had stood up, if he had tried to walk back to his office, I'm sure one of his colleagues would have asked him, what's wrong with you? And he would have said, they have killed me, my brother. He would have said the same thing. Santiago Nazar falls on the kitchen floor. Hrant Dink would have fallen on our hearts, because that's where he lies. Hrant Dink used to say, I'm from Anatolia, I'm from Malatya. He used to say, I'm from Turkey. And he used to say, Armenians and Turkish people, we are both patients and doctors to each other. In his own definition, he was a good leftist, he was a good Armenian. We would all stand witness to that. I know that very well. And Albie Sachs. He is born in South Africa. He was born in 1935, and he graduated from the University of Cape Town Department of Law, and he begins his practice at the age of 21. He defended people charged under apartheid's racist statutes, and as a result of his work, he was placed in solitary confinement for 168 days without trial. And then he went to exile to England. He completed his PhD on apartheid's relationship with the legal system and taught law at Sussex University. While working in Mozambique's capital, Maputo, as a law professor, a bomb was placed in his car by South African security agents, and that exploded. And he lost an arm and the sight in one eye. He devoted himself full-time to preparations for a new democratic constitution for South Africa and returned to his home country in 1990. After the first democratic elections in 1994, he served on the Constitutional Court for 15 years and played a vital role in the institutionalization of human rights. And he has received many awards for his books and his work in human rights and justice. So my first question to Albie Sachs is, as a freedom fighter and a man of law in South Africa, you served the Constitutional Court and you partook in writing the Constitution. Could you talk a little bit about that process? What kind of a journey was that? And also, the South African example is one of the most successful examples in regards to confrontation. So what do you think about that? How successful it was in your own opinion?
My story, when something terrible happens, I'm in total darkness. You're in Maputo Central Hospital. Your arm is in lamentable condition. You must face the future with courage. And I said, what happened? And a woman's voice said, it was a car bomb. I fainted back into the darkness, but with a sense of joy. I didn't say to myself, they killed me. I said to myself, they tried to kill me, and I'd survived. And I had that emotion. Every freedom fighter thinks, will they come for me today? If they come, will I be brave? Will I get through? And they tried to kill me, and I had survived. I tell this as Albie's story brought out by your story, but it also could be the story of millions of South Africans. And for me, one of the themes of collective memory that somehow gets forgotten and submerged is not only the memory of pain, of suffering, but the memory of struggle, of joy, and of achievement. And I remember having been transferred to hospital in London. I received a letter. Do you remember those things, letters? You would lick the stamp and close it. And I open it with my one hand. And the note says, don't worry, Comrade Albie, we will avenge you. And I say to myself, avenge me? We're going to cut off the arms. We're going to blind in one eye. Is that what we are fighting for? But if we get freedom, if we get democracy, if we get the rule of law, that will be my soft vengeance. Roses and lilies will grow out of my arm. And from then onwards, my whole story has been the story of South Africa, of soft vengeance. It's not a story of total and utter triumph, but it's a story of an advance that was seen as impossible, It's a story of overcoming difficulties that would seem to be intractable. And it's a story that millions of people took part in. I heard later when I was in hospital, have you heard they've caught one of the persons who put the bomb in Comrade Albie's car? And I said to myself, if he is put on trial and the evidence is not enough to show beyond reasonable doubt that he is guilty and he is acquitted, that will be my soft vengeance. It's more important that we are living under the rule of law than that one rascal goes to jail. That confidence that I had wasn't based on any hard evidence, but was based on a conviction, a deep conviction, the conviction of millions of people in struggle. And if we have a great constitution today in South Africa, if we have courts that are functioning and holding our president to account, if we have newspapers that tell stories with great vitality, with marvelous investigation, it's not simply because we had clever people drafting a good constitution, but because millions of people took part in the freedom struggle. And in the course of fighting for freedom, we took moral decisions. We don't use torture against people whom we've captured in the ANC. We don't use torture because we don't take our morality from the enemy. We don't use terrorism against civilians because we want a country one day. These were decisions we took in the liberation struggle. And so when it came to writing the Constitution, it was a constitution of our dreams and goals, and also a constitution against ourselves, because we had seen people who had fought heroically for freedom in many countries had gone on to become very harsh and tyrannical. We had seen inside our own ranks people had abused their positions. So I'll end with this. Our constitution then was built on the tension between perfectibility, you aim for perfectibility, and corruptibility, you guard against corruptibility. And you create institutions to ensure that if the people who were aiming for perfection end up becoming corrupt, the institutions can be invoked and they will function. And because our collective memories of struggle, of idealism, of hope are still strong enough, and because there's been enough evidence of transformation and change in our country, when things started to go very negative and very bad, and there was grave abuse of office, the institutions were able to function with huge popular support. And I can bring a degree of, if you like, optimism, which I'm very happy to share with the audience here. And can I just say thank you to the organizers of this very extraordinary event. One goes to many human rights events and you just hear a litany of negative things that have happened, but human beings get left out of it. And here, instead of long lectures and denunciations, you've brought us into the picture. You've got three different perspectives. So thank you, Hrant Dink. Thank you very much for being in existence. And thank you for memorializing the hopes, the idealism, and the ultimate optimism of people like the person whom this event is named after.
Şu soruyu da sormadım.
I have to ask this question. Apartheid used to be a time when Alford Penitentiary was used to incarcerate people, and Mandela was one of them incarcerated too. But then in 2014, this penitentiary was converted into an art museum, and how did this transformation took place, and what does it symbolize? What does this transformation symbolize to you? Because this penitentiary is now home to more than 200 contemporary artists in South Africa. Could you please tell us the story a little bit?
Okay. The facts are even better than that. It was 2004. We built the new constitutional court right in the heart of the prison where both Mandela and Gandhi had been locked up. And it's a beautiful building. People were saying to us, how can you put up a building like this in the midst of a horrible prison? Knock down the prison. Forget the past. Let's start from the beginning. And we said, no, we have a court now because people went to jail. We want people who come into the court to remember why we have a constitution. But we also want people coming to visit the jails to know we've now got a court. It's turning negativity into positivity, which is much more powerful than trying to eliminate the negative and get a pure positivity. When we created the court, this is for me a rather amusing part, we were a brand new court, and the Chief Justice gave tasks to everybody. The rules of court, a new thing called computers, a library, and two of us were left, Albie Sachs and Yvonne Mokgoro. He said, can you do decor? And he gave us $2,000. But with $2,000, a lot of madness, the support of the arts community, the emotions of the time, you can create something very, very beautiful. And we got this wonderful piece of architecture that's winning all the prizes, and we filled it with art. Art from our famous artists, art from people who don't even know they're artists, they just make beautiful things. And the idea is that you don't separate reason from beauty, from art, from emotion. Artists are thoughtful, they're intelligent, they comment on the world, but they use their forms of expression. Judges, we use language, but we're human beings. We have emotions, we have passion. And so that idea of reason and passion coexisting in the same physical environment coexists with reason and compassion that good judges should have. And so we are very proud of the artwork in the court, but we are also very proud of very creative judges who are brave, who speak a language that the people can understand, and who have huge popular support in the country.
Efendim son 10 dakika.
We have about 10 or 15 more minutes. We can continue, but I assume you might have some questions. Would you like to ask questions to our panelists, or would you like us to continue? Let's listen more. Let's listen more. All right, let's listen more. Iqbal, I think you have some things to say. And without any questions, I just would like to turn the floor over to Iqbal. While sitting here, we've been letting on some news covered by BBC yesterday. The French President Emmanuel Macron released a public statement yesterday. It's actually admitting to the fact that in Algiers back in 1950 and 52, the army was given special powers in order to restore public order and security, leading to abuses, rights violations, and even torture. A 21-year-old Algiers citizen who was a protester disappeared in detention. Macron had nothing to do with this offense, and he is instead referring to a crime against humanity that took place back in the year 1950 and 52. However, continuity is a principle of any given state, and according to international law, disappearance in detention or under detention is an uninterrupted crime, which stands to mean that there is no statute of limitations for disappearances in detention. From the moment of detention, regardless of how many years pass by, unless the fate of the individual gets disclosed, the state in question is in constant commissioning of an offense. The disappearance itself, not only it is a crime, but also not letting the kins of that individual know their whereabouts is a continuous crime, and it's a continuous torture. In the Turkish Penal Code, we have Article 77 with direct reference to crimes against humanity. However, there is no reference to disappearance in detention, in police custody, because the state would have to admit to the crimes it has committed if there was a direct reference to disappearances in police custody. Right now, the state is actually committing a crime against humanity by not disclosing information regarding the whereabouts of our relatives that disappeared in police custody. We're always talking about violation of human rights, and I think one of the greatest violations stand out to disappear someone by taking them in custody. Because as state, if you take someone in police custody, you are in charge of their right to life and health. By disappearing that individual, you are snatching away their rights to defend themselves, to provide access to free trial, and by not letting their relatives know about the whereabouts, you are torturing their relatives forever and ever. The Turkish state had previously been sentenced by the European Court of Human Rights due to past disappearances of individuals in police custody and for not telling the families what happened to their loved ones. Every week, when we silently protest and sit down in Galatasaray Square, we are sharing the truth about our loved ones, but we are also demanding certain things from international organizations. UN has a convention to which Turkey is not a signatory party. It is about the disappearance of individuals in police custody. We demand international parliamentarians to exert pressure upon Turkey to become a signatory party to this convention and conventions of this nature. When this convention will get signed by the Turkish state, our problems about disappearances in police custody within the borders of the Republic of Turkey will have been solved once and for all, as the state will be held accountable. Looking at the past in order to design the future is the main theme of our gathering today, and I think it's a beautiful theme. We all ignore. We all stop looking in Turkey, including myself. It is a crime for the state to lose people in police custody, which has become a tradition for the state of Turkey. And until it happens to us, we don't pay much attention, because it has always been a part of our traditions. Many Armenians were lost in police custody, and many other ethnic minorities were lost in police custody. And I am not sure whether you are aware. I wasn't aware, and I found out about these disappearances in our history when I started sitting down as a Mother of Saturday. Sabahattin Ali is a famous novelist. That's how we know him. But actually, he's a famous novelist whose grave is missing because he was disappeared in police custody. Sabahattin Ali's daughter and widow never introduced themselves to the people around them, to their neighbors and to their peers. For 15 years, they had to hide, and they had to hide their identities because they were related to Sabahattin Ali, who disappeared in police custody and whose grave is unknown. This is the information that is being kept from us. If I knew Sabahattin Ali disappeared in police custody, if I knew more than 100 Armenian intellectuals disappeared in police custody, and if I knew 15 members of one given organization disappeared in police custody in the 1990s, had I known about them all, we would have done something to stop any further disappearances in police custody from taking place. We wouldn't have allowed things to escalate at this extent. Had we done something about this in the past, the disappearances of the 1990s would not have happened. If history, if official history was speaking about these facts, the truth, nothing but the truth, there would no longer be disappearances in police custody. Truth has to remain naked. Truth has to be unearthed. We should not find out about the truth only when something happens to us, but instead we have to embrace, own up to the truth as the citizens of any given country. We all have to become advocates, the defenders of human rights. This is what I see here. Not only in Turkey, but everywhere around the world, human rights violations are on the rise, excessively due to the fact that authoritarian regimes are becoming much more stronger and much more widespread. That's why the advocates of human rights need to assume a greater responsibility to rise up to the occasion and serve this greater purpose. We need to increase the number of people becoming more and more sensitive towards these issues. We don't want to see any more mothers crying because of their loved and lost ones. But just uniting as mothers for that rally will not be enough. We need to gather as the entire community, as the entire nation. Thank you. Boris Belenkin. Can you elaborate on the developments vis-à-vis human rights both in Russia and in other countries that you have studied?
На нескольких примерах, на двух примерах, двух-трех примерах, которые характеризуют отношение к прошлому, к исторической памяти и сегодняшние права человека. Первое – это есть такое...
Excuse me, we're not currently getting any relay from the Russian booth. We'd like to apologize for the delay. No, we're not getting relay from the Russian interpretation booth. We can hear the speaker.
Занимается в том числе поиском мест массовых захоронений жертв политических репрессий. Те места,
We were trying to find the mass graves of victims of political oppression. And such a mass grave was once found in the north of Russia. This mass grave is called Sandarmuh, and one of the activists of our society, Yuri Dmitriev, some years back was arrested, and then he was released, and then after a certain time he was arrested again, and now he's in prison, and he's under detention, and there's still no ruling about him, by the way. The Sandarmuh mass grave is proven, it's documented, it's there, and it's proven. A short while ago, by the way, this mass graveyard is in a forest, and a short while ago certain monuments were erected, and there are monuments for people who were victims. Now there's a new decision to start excavations there. During the Second World War in 1941 and 1942, when the war broke out, many people had died, and mainly Finnish people died in the region of Karelia. And later on, some monuments were put up. And now what they're trying to do basically is, although that is a mass graveyard for people who were killed and who were under political oppression, and then who had died or killed, now they make it as if that graveyard was for people who had lost their lives during the Second World War. So the story is being turned around. I mean, and there are other examples like this. In 1968, in August, many Russians, they went to the Red Square, and they protested on the 25th of August in 1962. There was this protest, and there were police attacks. These people, these brave people, were able to hold up their posters only for about 1 minute, and then they were arrested by KGB. 50 years after that, another demonstration took place, a demonstration which no longer was banned. The same people, some people came with the same posters, and they could not even hold up their posters now, even for 1 minute. They could only protest for 30 seconds. One of those who was arrested that day was a relative to someone who was arrested 50 years ago in the same demonstration. So that's another example of collective memory. In Grozny, the Ayub Tetiev, a Chechnyan representative, he is again under custody and he's waiting for his hearings, and they accuse him of using drugs and trafficking drugs. So that's where we are today.
Efendim, oturumuzun sonuna geldik.
Yes, this marks the end of this session, and I'd like to wrap it up with a few sentences. In the past, there was a master craftsman building musical instruments, and there was a young musician waiting one day for his musical instrument to be completed. But before he gets delivered the instrument, the master craftsman throws it on the floor, smashing it into pieces. He is astonished, looking at the master craftsman, asking why he did what he did. The master craftsman mended and started bringing all the pieces together, giving it back to the young musician, only to find out that the sound of the instrument was even better. Now that it was a wounded musical instrument, it sounded even more emotional. That's why the voices you hear over this floor are so emotional, because these are wounded voices. This is the strength that our wounds bring us. These are the wounds that will never heal. This is called duende. Duende is the emotional power that comes from our broken and wounded souls. Thank you.